The cosmos begins not with clarity, but with shadow. Imagine a vast expanse of darkness, stretching endlessly in every direction, silent and indifferent, until, suddenly, light breaks through. The first glimmers are not the familiar points of starlight we see today, but patterns drawn by hands long forgotten. Ancient scrolls, weathered stone, and star-splattered skies whisper of maps. Maps not meant for every eye, not meant for every age. These are the forbidden charts of the heavens, the ones hidden behind veils of secrecy, fear, and wonder. The story begins at the edge of human curiosity, with questions so old they feel eternal. Who first looked up at the night sky and saw more than stars? Who decided that these constellations held secrets? And more importantly, why were some of those secrets erased, sealed, or burned away? Across cultures, scattered through centuries, humanity has left behind fragments of maps that reach beyond geography into the very fabric of the cosmos. They do not simply chart locations. They hint at meanings, at pathways, at knowledge dangerous enough to be forbidden. Imagine walking through a dimly lit archive where manuscripts lie untouched for centuries. Dust coats their surfaces, but within them are star charts unlike any in modern textbooks. Some align with temples thousands of miles apart. Others mirror constellations we no longer recognize. The ink, though faded, pulses with intent, as if each symbol was drawn not to instruct, but to conceal. The viewer is invited into this atmosphere of secrecy, where discovery and danger intertwine. To gaze upon these maps is to stand between illumination and destruction. What makes a map forbidden? Is it the knowledge it contains, or the consequences of its misuse? Consider that in ancient times, to control the stars was to control destiny itself. A king's power could be affirmed or undermined by an eclipse. A harvest could be foretold or ruined by the appearance of a wandering star. To keep such knowledge in the hands of a few was not merely practical, it was essential. Yet history suggests something deeper, that these maps revealed truths too unsettling to be freely known. The forbidden maps are never displayed in the open. They survive in fragments, encoded in myth, etched into stone temples, or buried beneath shifting sands. Some are said to guide souls to other realms, others to track beings that do not belong to Earth at all. Whether myth or reality, they invite a single, unsettling question. Why did so many cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, converge on the same idea, that the stars themselves held a dangerous power? The opening moment of this journey is not a lecture, but a revelation. We are not merely observers of the stars. We are inheritors of a mystery. Our ancestors saw the night sky not as a canvas of random lights, but as a coded design, perhaps even a message. Yet for reasons we still struggle to understand, much of that message was hidden, erased, or branded as heresy. Was it to protect us from truths we were not ready to face, or to keep us trapped in ignorance while the initiated few held dominion? This tension is what draws us in. Every culture has its myths of knowledge withheld. Forbidden fruits, hidden scrolls, sacred symbols. The maps of the cosmos fit perfectly into this universal pattern. They represent humanity's eternal dance with mystery, the yearning to see further, the fear of what we might find. To begin this story is to step into that liminal space between darkness and revelation, between hope and dread. And so, we begin not with answers, but with a question that lingers in the air like a faint echo across eternity. When humanity first mapped the sky, what did we discover that we were not meant to know? Fires once lit the first maps of the heavens, not with ink or paper, but with flames flickering against cavern walls and temple stones. Before compasses, before telescopes, before mathematics had a name, humanity's first maps were not of rivers or mountains, but of stars. Imagine a clearing thousands of years ago, the night sky stretching vast and unbroken above a group of people gathered around a fire. Sparks rise upward, vanishing into constellations that seem to move with purpose. To them, The stars were not lifeless spheres of gas, but burning symbols, eternal fires that guided and warned, ruled and inspired. It was in these earliest moments that the idea of mapping the cosmos was born. Civilizations that had never met, separated by oceans and deserts, nonetheless looked upward and saw stories written in the same scattered lights. The Sumerians marked the paths of Venus and Jupiter. The Egyptians aligned their monuments with Orion and Sirius. The Mayans carved their cosmic codes into stone, watching the heavens with obsessive precision. These were not idle observations. To them, the stars were instruments of prophecy, forces of destiny, and guides to survival. Their fires burned not only in the sky, but within ritual, within culture, within power. Consider the Temple of Karnak in Egypt, its colossal stones aligned with the midsummer sunrise. Or the mysterious city of Teotihuacan in Mesoamerica, designed to mirror the movement of constellations. These alignments were no accident. They were maps rendered not on parchment, but into the very bones of civilization. To walk through those temples was to walk through a living chart of the cosmos, a structure that declared, "Here, earth and sky are one." Yet the question lingers, why invest such unimaginable labor into aligning stone with starlight? What secret did they see in the heavens that demanded this monumental devotion? Across the ancient world, myths ignited from these star maps. The Greeks told of Orion the hunter, eternally chasing across the firmament. The Chinese spoke of celestial dragons and cosmic rivers. The Polynesians sailed vast oceans guided not by compasses, but by an internalized memory of constellations, a living map etched into the minds of navigators. Each culture kindled its own fire in the sky, but all shared one haunting belief. The stars were more than distant lights. They were signs. They were warnings. They were messages. The awe of these stories, however, is matched by unease. If the stars were divine, then to misread them could mean disaster. If they were coded with destiny, then only the initiated few, the priests, the shamans, the astronomers cloaked in secrecy, could be trusted to interpret their meaning. A harvest predicted wrongly could starve a people. A misread eclipse could undermine the legitimacy of a king. To chart the heavens was not simply a pursuit of wonder. It was a matter of survival, a weighty responsibility that tethered sky watchers to rulers and gods. But perhaps there was more. Some of these ancient maps do not align with the visible sky at all. Consider the depiction of star clusters in Aboriginal Australian traditions that predate modern astronomy by millennia, their accuracy astonishing. Or the Dogon people of Mali, who described the star Sirius and its invisible companion long before Western science confirmed its existence. How could such knowledge have been gathered without telescopes? Were these simply extraordinary observations or evidence of something deeper? Something passed down in secret, something deliberately obscured from the wider world? The fire of curiosity burns alongside the fire of fear. Knowledge of the stars brought order, but also raised dangerous questions. If the heavens could be mapped, could they also be manipulated? If fate was written in the constellations, could that fate be rewritten? Ancient civilizations walked a razor's edge between reverence and dread, and their star maps embody this paradox. They are at once celebrations of cosmic beauty and warnings of powers too great for common hands. As flames danced across temple walls, priests and kings would gather, gazing upward with a mixture of devotion and calculation. In their minds, each flicker of light above them connected to the rise and fall of empires. A comet was not a simple ball of ice. It was a sign of coming upheaval. A blood-red eclipse was not a natural event. It was the anger of gods. To hold the chart of the heavens was to hold the key to the rhythms of life and death. No wonder these maps were guarded, concealed, and sometimes destroyed. The fires in the sky, then, were not merely celestial. They were the inner flames of human ambition, wonder, and fear. Each civilization added its ember to the collective blaze, shaping a legacy of cosmic maps that still puzzle us today. Were these early charts innocent attempts to make sense of the night, or deliberate codes left for us to decipher? Were they acts of reverence or acts of control? The embers of these questions still glow in the ashes of history, waiting for us to breathe them back to flame. And as we step further into this story, one question burns brighter than all the rest. If these civilizations saw the stars as messages, who or what was sending them? They stood at the boundary between man and the cosmos, keepers of secrets that bound heaven to earth. Across ancient civilizations, from the banks of the Nile to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia to the stone cities of the Maya, a singular figure emerged, the astronomer priest. They were not mere sky watchers. They were interpreters of divine will, wielding knowledge of the stars as both sacred trust and political weapon. To understand them is to step into the hidden chambers of power, where maps of the heavens dictated the fates of kings, crops, and entire civilizations. Imagine a ziggurat rising from the Mesopotamian earth, its tiers reaching upward like a ladder to the stars. At its summit stands a priest, cloaked in ritual garments, peering through the night at Venus shimmering low on the horizon. To the farmers below, it is a distant light. To him, it is a sign, perhaps of harvest, perhaps of war, perhaps of doom. His interpretation is final, and it will shape the decisions of rulers and the lives of thousands. This was the true weight of cosmic maps. They were not just diagrams of stars, but instruments of authority. In Egypt, the priesthood of Ammonius guarded celestial knowledge with obsessive secrecy. Their temples were aligned with solstices and star risings, their rituals tethered to the motions of Sirius, whose reappearance in the dawn sky heralded the flooding of the Nile. To control this knowledge was to control time itself. Pharaohs, believed to be divine, still relied on these astronomer priests to ensure their reigns flowed in harmony with the heavens. When the stars said it was time for coronation or ritual, so it was. And when eclipses or strange celestial events appeared, the same priests crafted explanations that safeguarded the pharaoh's legitimacy. Their maps were less about truth and more about power, the cosmos shaped to fit the needs of earthly rule. Travel across the ocean to Mesoamerica, where the Maya tracked the heavens with uncanny precision. Their astronomer priests recorded planetary cycles in codices, weaving celestial mathematics with prophecy. They calculated eclipses centuries in advance, turning the sky into a theater of fear and reverence. When an eclipse came, they could declare it a triumph of their ritual power, proof that the gods spoke through them. The common people saw darkness consume the sun and believed only the priest's chants could restore the light. Behind the scenes, carefully guarded calendars and star maps gave the priests the edge, knowledge hidden in plain sight, transformed into divine authority. The power of these figures lay not only in what they revealed, but in what they withheld. Knowledge, after all, is most potent when scarce. By veiling their maps in ritual and myth, the astronomer priests ensured that no farmer, no merchant, no soldier could challenge their role as intermediaries. To the uninitiated, the constellations were stories of gods and monsters. To the priests, they were coded instructions, precise coordinates, and predictable cycles. To reveal too much would be to dissolve the mystery that empowered them. And so, silence became as vital as revelation. Yet there is another layer, more unsettling. Some of these star maps do not merely track the visible motions of planets and stars. They encode patterns that suggest a deeper knowledge, alignments to constellations not easily visible, references to celestial bodies that should not have been known. How did the Maya record the exact length of the Venusian year with such accuracy? How did Babylonian astronomers track Jupiter's path using methods resembling modern calculus? Were these astonishing feats the result of millennia of careful observation, or did the astronomer priests inherit fragments of knowledge from an even older, hidden source? The role of these priests was therefore twofold: guardians of earthly order, and perhaps keepers of something even more forbidden. For while their charts granted kings the ability to rule, they also whispered of truths beyond the grasp of their age. A cosmic duality emerges. On one side, stability and power. On the other, glimpses of terrifying possibilities that could unseat both gods and men. In this balance, secrecy was essential. To release too much could be catastrophic, but to keep it forever might be impossible. We are left, then, with an image of men standing on temple rooftops, eyes fixed on the heavens, hands clutching scrolls and instruments that only they could interpret. Around them, empires rose and fell, battles were waged, and generations lived and died. Yet through it all, they remained, quiet figures translating the eternal fires of the sky into the fleeting language of earthly power. They were feared, revered, and sometimes destroyed, but their influence lingered across millennia. The astronomer priests remind us of an uncomfortable truth. Knowledge is never neutral. A star map can be a tool of wonder or a weapon of control, depending on who holds it. In their hands, it was both. And as we trace the arc of their influence, one haunting question lingers. Did they truly understand the skies they claimed to master, or were they merely stewards of secrets left by something far older? The stars have always been more than distant lights. To countless civilizations, they shimmered like gateways, thresholds into realms beyond ordinary human reach. Where modern astronomy sees hydrogen and helium burning across unimaginable distances, ancient eyes perceive doors, bridges, and corridors leading elsewhere. It was never enough to say, here is Orion, here is Sirius, here are the Pleiades. The question whispered through temples and campfires alike was always deeper. What lies behind them? Imagine standing on a desert plateau at night, where the sky stretches clear and vast, unpolluted by modern light. Above you, Orion's belt gleams in sharp perfection, its 3 stars aligned like jewels on a celestial sword. To the Egyptians, Orion was Osiris, the god of resurrection, his figure striding across the heavens. The pyramids themselves, massive stone sentinels, were aligned to mirror Orion's stars. But why? Were these monuments tombs of kings or launch points for souls, maps guiding the dead toward a cosmic destination? The architecture suggests more than symbolism. It suggests intention. The stars were not only markers, they were portals. Sirius, the blazing dog star, held similar reverence. It heralded the flooding of the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt. But in myth, it was more than a harbinger of fertility. It was seen as the home of gods, a place of origin. In West Africa, the Dogon people told stories of beings descending from Sirius long before telescopes revealed its invisible companion star. How could such knowledge exist in a preliterate culture without modern tools? Was Sirius a beacon, a celestial doorway visited or envisioned by those who came before us? The mystery lingers, unsettling in its implications. The Pleiades, a tiny cluster of stars that glimmers like a misty jewel box, recur in myths across the globe. The Greeks saw them as the 7 sisters, pursued eternally by Orion. The Japanese call them Subaru, a gathering together. Native American traditions often describe them as a place of origin, a celestial homeland from which spirits descended. This repetition, cultures half a world apart telling nearly identical stories, suggests something profound. Were these narratives mere coincidence or memories of a deeper connection, a collective recognition of the stars as doorways? To treat the stars as portals is to blur the line between science and spirituality, between navigation and transcendence. Ancient navigators looked up and charted courses across oceans, trusting the stars to guide them through the dark. But for the priests and philosophers, the stars guided not ships, but souls. They asked, if there are paths across the sea, might there also be paths across the sky? Could the soul travel upon them, crossing from this life into another existence, or even to other worlds? These questions ignite a tension between awe and fear. If the stars are merely distant suns, they are beautiful but indifferent. If they are gateways, They might lead us to realms of wonder, or to abysses we cannot endure. Ancient myths often warned of dangers, descent into the underworld, journeys to celestial realms fraught with trials. The maps encoded into temples and myths may not have been guides for the curious, but warnings for the unprepared. To approach the portal without ritual, without initiation, was to risk destruction. And yet, curiosity is relentless. Imagine the astronomer priest alone atop his temple, the firelight behind him, the sky a cathedral of black and silver. He traces the lines between stars, whispering invocations, believing he is not only observing, but touching the threshold of something vast. Perhaps he fears what lies beyond, yet the pull is irresistible. Humanity has always reached for doors, no matter how forbidden. Modern eyes may dismiss these interpretations as superstition, but even in contemporary science, the metaphor of portals endures. Wormholes, black holes, space-time distortions, concepts that echo the ancient sense of the stars as gateways. Physics describes them in equations rather than myth, yet the imagery remains the same, a passage from here to elsewhere, a bridge between what is known and what lies beyond. Could it be that the ancients, in their language of gods and spirits, were gesturing toward truths we are only now beginning to articulate? This section leaves us poised between reverence and dread. To see the stars as portals is to confront the possibility that we are not merely spectators of the cosmos, but participants in a vast architecture whose full design we do not understand. The myths that surround Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades are not just stories. They are keys, fragments of maps pointing toward mysteries still unsolved. The night sky hangs above us, the same as it did for those who built pyramids and carved codices, a vast dome studded with fires. Each light could be a sun, or a symbol, or a door. We are left to wonder, when our ancestors called the stars gateways, did they speak in metaphor, or did they know something we have forgotten? Empires have always guarded their maps with jealousy. To chart the unknown is to claim dominion over it. And in the turbulent centuries of exploration, maps of the earth and of the sky were treated as treasures of power. The forbidden charts of empire were not simply parchment and ink. They were the lifelines of fleets, the skeletons of global trade, and the invisible threads that bound entire kingdoms together. To keep such maps hidden was not paranoia, it was survival. For in the wrong hands, a map could be the undoing of nations. Picture a candlelit chamber deep within the vaults of Lisbon in the 15th century. Locked chests hold documents that could change the course of history. Sea routes traced across oceans, celestial charts guiding sailors to lands not yet claimed. Few outside the crown's chosen navigators would ever glimpse them. In these maps, the stars became instruments of empire. They allowed Portuguese fleets to sail where rivals could not, to return home while others vanished in storms. A chart was a weapon more devastating than cannon fire, for it carried the promise of riches and dominion. No wonder the punishment for stealing or copying such documents was death. Spain, too, jealously guarded its cosmic maps. After Columbus returned, Spanish officials classified the routes he followed and the celestial observations he made. Ship captains were often forbidden from sharing star charts or logs under penalty of execution. Knowledge of the sky, combined with precise maps of currents and winds, was as tightly controlled as gold. The stars no longer belonged only to priests or philosophers. They had become imperial property, restricted and policed, part of a grand contest for supremacy across the globe. This secrecy created a strange paradox. Exploration was celebrated as the triumph of human curiosity, yet the knowledge it produced was locked away. Maps that could inspire wonder and discovery were instead buried in archives, chained by wax seals and iron locks. The public saw the glory of new lands claimed in the name of kings, but they never saw the star charts that made the journeys possible. These maps were forbidden, not because they revealed cosmic horrors, but because they revealed too much about earthly ambition. The forbidden charts of empire were not only practical tools, they also carried myths of their own. Sailors whispered of maps showing lands at the edge of the known world, routes guided by strange constellations never seen before. Some spoke of star patterns leading to islands that vanished, of charts erased or altered to mislead enemies. Was it all rumor, or did hidden maps preserve encounters and discoveries that official histories erased? Every empire had its silences, and in those silences, the possibility of forbidden knowledge took root. There were darker stories as well. Navigators caught sharing maps with rival nations were imprisoned, tortured, or executed. Some were forced to vanish into obscurity, their names struck from records. The maps they carried became ghostly things, spoken of but never seen, like treasures locked in labyrinthine vaults beneath royal palaces. To glimpse one was to touch power itself, but also to court disaster. Knowledge of the stars was no longer an open sky. It was fenced, guarded, and turned into the currency of empire. The stars themselves became accomplices in this great game. To sail by their light was to stake claims on foreign shores, to spread flags and faiths, to redraw the boundaries of the world. Yet those same stars reminded sailors of dangers, storms, reefs, and the vast emptiness that could swallow ships whole. Empires controlled maps to suppress fear as much as to maintain power. If the official charts declared order, the sailors' whispered accounts told of chaos, of phantom islands, cursed constellations, and anomalies that never appeared in sanctioned documents. As the age of exploration advanced, the secrecy deepened. Observatories were built not only for science, but for statecraft, where astronomers employed by monarchs recorded data that would never see the light of day. Celestial navigation manuals were censored, their details stripped to prevent rivals from learning too much. In this way, the heavens themselves became classified information. The night sky was still visible to all, but its true map, the secret paths and calculations that unlocked empire, was forbidden. This raises a haunting question. How much of history was shaped by knowledge deliberately withheld? How many voyages were never recorded? How many discoveries concealed? How many maps destroyed to ensure only a chosen few could navigate the stars? We inherit only fragments, scraps of parchment, and rumor. Yet even these fragments hint at a deeper truth, that the sky we gaze upon freely today was once the most tightly guarded frontier. The forbidden charts of empire remind us that knowledge is never neutral. A map can liberate or enslave, reveal or conceal, depending on who holds it. The rulers of that era knew it well. To release a map was to risk losing power, but to hide it was to hold the destiny of nations in one's hands. And so they locked their star charts away, leaving behind a legacy of mystery and silence that still smolders in the shadows of history. The Renaissance is remembered as a time of light, of rediscovery, of knowledge flowing freely after centuries of shadow. Yet within this flowering of art and science, secrets still lingered, cloaked not in temples or vaults, but in the very maps themselves. The cartographers of the era did more than chart lands and seas. They encoded the heavens into their drawings, embedding hidden symmetries that continue to puzzle historians. These were maps not only of geography, but of something larger, something cosmic. And in their silence, what they chose not to explain, we glimpse the outlines of a deeper mystery. Picture a great wooden table in a Venetian workshop, parchment spread wide, compass and quill resting atop. A cartographer leans over, sketching coastlines with precision, his eyes darting not only to reports from sailors, but also to star charts pinned on the wall. To the untrained eye, his map is simply a record of lands and oceans. But look closer, and hidden geometries emerge. Cities aligned with constellations, trade routes bending toward celestial parallels, even entire continents shaped to echo patterns in the night sky. Were these coincidences or deliberate designs? The silence of the mapmakers is striking. They left few written explanations for these symmetries. Instead, their creations speak through implication, whispering hints of a worldview where earth and sky were mirrors of one another. Some historians argue that such designs reflected only aesthetic beauty, a fascination with proportion and harmony. Yet others see something far more provocative, evidence that these cartographers inherited fragments of ancient knowledge and chose to preserve it quietly, hidden in their work. Consider the mysterious from Morrow map of the 15th century. Ostensibly, it is a terrestrial chart, but within its elaborate decorations lie celestial references, constellations tucked between coastlines, strange alignments woven into its margins. Or the maps of Mercator, whose famous projection reshaped navigation. His writings hint at hidden harmonies that connect the heavens and the earth, harmonies he never fully explained. Was this restraint caution or concealment? Even in art, the blending of sky and earth was deliberate. Renaissance paintings often embedded star constellations in the backgrounds of biblical scenes, aligning sacred stories with cosmic order. Cathedrals were built according to astronomical principles, their spires reaching not only upward but outward, extensions of celestial geometry drawn onto the terrestrial plane. Everywhere, a pattern emerges, a quiet insistence that the heavens were not merely above us, but imprinted within the world we walk upon. Yet the danger of this knowledge was real. The Renaissance was not free from dogma. The Inquisition loomed over Europe, ready to silence any suggestion that the universe was more than the Church decreed. To map the cosmos too boldly was to invite suspicion, trial, or worse. Thus, cartographers and scholars adopted silence as their shield. They cloaked their discoveries in allegory, in decorative flourishes, in the quiet symmetry of their designs. The maps became double-faced documents, public tools of navigation, private vessels of hidden truth. This silence itself becomes its own form of communication. What is not said often speaks louder than what is. The absence of explanation forces us to wonder. What did they know that they dared not speak aloud? Were they tracing patterns they barely understood, or preserving fragments of knowledge that had survived from forgotten ages? Their maps, after all, outlived them, carrying whispers of mystery across centuries. There is something unsettling in these silences. They suggest not ignorance, but restraint. Not error, but intention. To imagine a mapmaker carefully sketching coastlines, then quietly aligning them with Orion or the Pleiades, is to glimpse a mind caught between two worlds, the practical demands of empire and trade, and the forbidden allure of cosmic symmetry. It is to witness knowledge hidden in plain sight, disguised as mere ornament. The silence of the mapmakers also invites a darker speculation. Perhaps they encoded what they feared as much as what they revered. Strange symbols mark some maps. Sea monsters, islands that do not exist, celestial bodies misplaced or exaggerated. Were these errors or warnings? Could these silences be the echoes of knowledge too dangerous to pass on fully? Knowledge preserved only in fragments for those with eyes sharp enough to see? As we examine these maps today, under the bright lights of museums and the sharper lens of science, we cannot help but feel that they are incomplete, puzzles with missing pieces. The silence of the Renaissance cartographers continues to challenge us, to provoke us, to remind us that not all knowledge is spoken. Some of it is drawn, encoded, and hidden in plain sight, waiting for a future generation to decipher. And so, we stand in the shadow of their silence, faced with an unnerving question. Did the mapmakers know more than they revealed, or did they reveal more than we are yet prepared to understand? The age of discovery unleashed a torrent of exploration across oceans once thought endless and impenetrable. Yet for all the new lands unveiled, for every coastline added to the map, there was always something curiously withheld. Margins of parchment filled with cryptic warnings, blank spaces framed with fear, and phrases like terra incognita written with deliberate finality. These omissions were not mere gaps in knowledge. They were acts of silence, places where the cartographer's quill refused to go. The maps of this era were as much about what was concealed as what was revealed. Imagine a sailor in the 16th century, unrolling a fresh map by candlelight. The coastlines shimmer with detail, ports marked with precision, currents traced with confidence. But then, his eyes wander toward the edges, where ink gives way to uncertainty. Here, sea serpents twist across waves, leviathans breach the waters, and phantom islands linger without coordinates. These images were not whimsical decorations. They were coded warnings, reminders of a frontier where human reason faltered. The blank spaces were not empty. They were saturated with dread. For explorers, the unknown was both intoxicating and terrifying. To sail into an unmapped ocean was to risk slipping into nothingness, where compasses spun wild and stars seemed to vanish. The blankness on maps mirrored the void in human understanding, a silent testimony to dangers whispered by rumor but unverified by sight. Were these gaps expressions of humility, a recognition that the world was too vast to fully capture? Or were they deliberate erasures, attempts to hide places deemed too sacred or too dangerous for common knowledge? Some maps bear uncanny omissions. The Pyrie Reis map, drawn in 1513, is celebrated for its astonishing accuracy in depicting parts of South America and even a seemingly ice-free Antarctica. Yet vast portions of the known world are absent, erased as though irrelevant. Why would a cartographer include extraordinary detail in some regions and leave others empty? Was it access to hidden knowledge, or obedience to forbidden secrecy? Likewise, early depictions of the Pacific often excluded entire archipelagos that were already known to indigenous sailors and traders. Whole societies vanished into cartographic silence, their existence suppressed by maps that privileged imperial eyes. This silence was not neutral. It shaped history, determining which worlds were visible to Europe and which remained in shadow. Every omission carried weight, an erasure that echoed through centuries. Even in Europe, maps sometimes withheld information out of deliberate caution. The Portuguese, in their age of naval supremacy, treated maps as state secrets. Their cartographers produced richly detailed charts, but only fragments circulated publicly. To reveal too much was to arm rivals, to weaken empires. Silence became a weapon, a way of controlling not just seas, but the very imagination of what seas might hold. The dangers hidden in blank spaces were not only physical, but existential. Sailors believed that sailing off the edge of a chart was to sail off the edge of the world. A fear reinforced not only by monsters sketched in margins, but by the silence of authority. Church and crown alike often refused to clarify what lay beyond. This silence created an atmosphere of awe, of terror, where the limits of knowledge became indistinguishable from the limits of human destiny. Yet it was precisely this silence that drove curiosity forward. The unknown, marked so vividly in absence, became an irresistible lure. Blank spaces begged to be filled. What lay where the ink ended? Was there land, or only void? Sailors risked everything to answer these unspoken questions, compelled by the silence itself. In this paradox, we find one of history's strangest truths, that ignorance, carefully marked and preserved, can be as powerful a motivator as knowledge. But we must ask, were these blank spaces truly voids, or carefully chosen veils? Some modern researchers suspect that omissions in certain Renaissance maps were not due to ignorance at all, but to deliberate concealment. Islands known to exist were erased, routes charted by navigators were left unmarked. Perhaps the mapmakers knew more than they dared reveal, bound by secrecy, fear, or allegiance to powers greater than kings. These silences ripple into the present. We live in an age where satellites photograph every inch of Earth. Yet even now, there are regions marked by absence. Military zones blurred out, data redacted, secrets left unspoken. The legacy of cartographic silence continues, reminding us that maps are never just records of reality. They are instruments of power, shaping not only how we see the world, but how we are allowed to see it. And so, when we look back at the blank spaces of Renaissance maps, We are not merely observing ignorance, but encountering a profound tension. The silence at the edges of the known world is a silence pregnant with meaning, one that forces us to confront a timeless question. What dangers or revelations lie just beyond the reach of ink, waiting for those willing or reckless enough to cross the threshold? In the centuries that followed the first wave of exploration, cartography entered a new and stranger phase. Maps ceased to be just tools of navigation and became something more enigmatic. Repositories of anomalies, compendiums of mysteries, and records of places that seemed to shimmer in and out of existence. Here, in the fragile dance between discovery and imagination, a strange category of geography emerged. Phantom islands, lands that appeared on maps for centuries yet were never truly there. These cartographic ghosts tell us as much about the human mind as they do about the oceans they haunted. Consider Hy Brasil, a mythical island said to lie west of Ireland. For generations, it appeared consistently on European maps, marked with careful confidence, as though its existence was beyond doubt. Sailors searched for it tirelessly, claiming glimpses of a mist-shrouded shore that would vanish before they could land. The island endured in cartography for centuries, only to disappear entirely once exploration proved it was never there. What lingers is the question, was Hy Brasil a fabrication, a mirage, or a collective hallucination preserved in ink? Then there's the case of Sandy Island in the Coral Sea, near Australia. It appeared on nautical charts for over a century, even making its way onto modern satellite databases. Yet in 2012, a scientific expedition confirmed that the island simply did not exist. Here, in the age of satellites and GPS, the ghost of a cartographic error survived longer than reason should allow. What power keeps a non-existent land alive for so long? Was it simply the inertia of error, or the persistence of mystery, feeding on humanity's desire to believe in what might lie beyond? Phantom Islands served many roles in the imagination of their time. They were warnings, promising dangers that could swallow ships whole. They were hopes, offering refuge or riches just over the horizon. Some were moral fables disguised as geography, lands where greed or curiosity could lead sailors to their doom. Others may have been deliberate fictions, inserted by mapmakers as traps for rival nations, markers that would mislead enemies while preserving true knowledge for the initiated. In this sense, Phantom Islands were weapons of deception, strategic silences dressed in ink. The allure of these places was amplified by the sea itself. Vast, shifting, and treacherous, the ocean invited misperception. Low clouds on the horizon could look like land. Strange refractions of light, caused by temperature layers in the atmosphere, could create mirages of coastlines that weren't there. Yet the persistence of these illusions on maps for centuries suggests something deeper, that humanity wanted these places to exist. The maps were not just records of reality, but projections of longing, hope, and fear. Some Phantom Islands carry an even darker legacy. The legendary Isle of Demons, off the coast of Canada, was said to be home to monstrous creatures and tormented souls. Sailors avoided it with dread, and cartographers marked it with ominous symbols. Yet modern historians suggest it may have been inspired by real encounters with hostile terrain, or even with peoples demonized by colonial imagination. In such cases, Phantom Islands become mirrors of prejudice and fear, places where the unknown was turned into the monstrous. Even today, the echoes of phantom geography remain. Digital maps sometimes glitch, producing impossible landforms in the middle of oceans. Ancient myths of vanished continents, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, still grip the collective imagination, blurring the line between lost civilizations and cartographic fantasy. Some researchers argue that these myths may preserve faint memories of real lands swallowed by rising seas in the deep past. If so, then the boundary between phantom and real is not as clear as we might believe. What unites all these stories is the way maps serve not only to guide, but to enchant. The inclusion of phantom islands turned the act of navigation into a journey through possibility itself. Sailors steered by coordinates, but also by the flickering shadows of desire, fear, and myth. Cartographers, knowingly or not, encoded these longings into their charts, transforming the ocean into a canvas where fact and fiction intermingled. And so, phantom islands remind us of the strange power of absence and illusion. They tell us that maps do not simply show us where we are, but also where we wish to be, where we dread to go, and what mysteries we still yearn to uncover. To study these ghostly lands is to confront the fragile boundary between knowledge and imagination, truth and deception. It is to realize that the most dangerous and seductive territories are sometimes the ones that never existed at all. By the dawn of the Enlightenment, maps were no longer simple parchments of coastlines and seas. They had become instruments of authority, wielded by kings, empires, and secretive societies alike. With every new expedition, with every chart corrected or coastline extended, the stakes grew higher. Whoever controlled the maps controlled not just the seas, but the very imagination of the world. Yet within this surge of knowledge, something unsettling persisted. Distortions, deliberate omissions, and encrypted codes woven into the very fabric of cartography. These were not the errors of amateurs, but the calculated moves of those who understood that knowledge was power, and that some knowledge was too dangerous to reveal plainly. Take, for example, the infamous walled similar map of 1507, the first to name America. While celebrated as a triumph, it also contained peculiar distortions. Some coastlines appear stretched or compressed in ways that cannot be explained by simple ignorance. Scholars argue that such distortions may have been intentional, shields against rivals, meant to obscure precise locations of valuable harbors or resources. The map was both revelation and deception, a weapon of empire masquerading as a tool of navigation. The Portuguese crown perfected this art of controlled geography. Their legendary Padrão Real, the secret master map, was guarded as a state treasure, accessible only to royal navigators and trusted captains. Copies that circulated publicly were edited, stripped of critical detail, or altered with false coordinates. To reveal the full truth of the oceans would have been to surrender supremacy, so silence was enforced with the threat of execution. Here, cartography was less a science than an act of espionage. Its greatest secrets invisible, its most valuable truths hidden in vaults rather than inked on parchment. But silence did not always come from empire. Sometimes, it came from individuals who saw maps as canvases for secret messages. Renaissance cartographers often embellished their charts with symbols, strange glyphs, or mythological creatures. To the casual viewer, these were decorative flourishes. But some researchers suspect they were encoded messages, allegories for forbidden knowledge. Alchemical symbols appear in unexpected places. Stars are drawn with mathematical precision, hinting at celestial alignments. And certain coastlines mirror geometric proportions too deliberate to be chance. Were these flourishes simply art, or a covert dialogue between initiates, a hidden language preserved through maps? The Jesuits, too, left their mark on the world of mapping, carrying charts across continents under the guise of missionary work. Their maps often blended science with theology, depicting lands not merely as physical spaces, but as stages for divine order. Yet many of their documents remain sealed or lost, raising the suspicion that their charts contained more than religious ambition. Some whispers suggest they encoded star charts within terrestrial maps, merging heaven and earth in ways intended only for the initiated. Even more curious are the persistent anomalies that appeared across different maps, separated by centuries and empires. Certain coastlines align too neatly with constellations, certain river systems mirror the branching of the Milky Way, and certain islands appear to follow ratios drawn from sacred geometry. These patterns are easy to dismiss as coincidence, until one notices how consistently they recur. It is as if mapmakers across ages were quietly acknowledging a hidden correspondence between the earth below and the heavens above. A cosmic symmetry preserved in silence, concealed in ink. The tension between revelation and secrecy created a strange duality. Public maps showed one version of the world, fragmented, distorted, incomplete. Private archives preserved another, more accurate and more dangerous. The silence of the cartographers, then, was not ignorance but discretion. To release certain truths could destabilize empires, challenge dogmas, or empower rivals. Better, perhaps, to weave silence into the parchment, to let future generations wonder at what had been concealed. For us, the unsettling question is not just what was hidden, but why. Was it greed, the desire to hoard power? Was it fear, the recognition that some knowledge could unravel belief itself? Or was it reverence, an instinct to protect truths that humanity was not ready to face? The silence of the mapmakers echoes not only across centuries, but across our own present, where information is still shaped, filtered, and withheld by those who claim to know best. Maps, after all, are not mirrors of the world. They are arguments about it. They tell us what matters, what is seen, and what is erased. When distortions, omissions, and codes enter the picture, they reveal not only landscapes but the minds of those who drew them, their fears, ambitions, and loyalties. To study these silences is to recognize that cartography has always been a battleground, a canvas where truth and secrecy coexist in uneasy tension. And so, every map we inherit from this era carries two layers: the visible geography of coastlines and rivers, and the invisible geography of silence, distortion, and secrecy. One speaks to the sailor, the other whispers to those who know how to look between the lines. The danger and the allure lies in realizing that the maps we trust may never have been about showing the world as it is, but about shaping the world as others wanted us to believe it to be. By the 18th century, maps were no longer the guarded secrets of kings and empires alone. They began to circulate widely, copied into atlases, sold in markets, and hung on the walls of universities. But with this proliferation came another transformation. Maps ceased to be only practical tools and became philosophical texts, silent invitations to consider humanity's place in the cosmos. No longer just charts of seas and continents. They became mirrors of belief, diagrams of metaphysics, and canvases where the limits of knowledge collided with the vastness of mystery. The silence embedded in their blank spaces was no longer merely geographic. It became existential. Enlightenment thinkers wrestled with the paradox of a universe suddenly made infinite. The old, bounded world of medieval cosmology, with its fixed heavens, its ordered spheres, was collapsing under the weight of new science. Galileo's telescope had revealed that the heavens were not crystalline perfection, but scarred and restless. Newton's mathematics implied a cosmos without edges, where gravity bound every star to every other across endless distances. Maps, which once promised closure and certainty, could no longer pretend to capture the whole. Their silences grew louder, filled not with monsters and phantoms, but with the unfathomable abyss of infinity. This shift changed the way cartographers approached their craft. Many began to place elaborate frames around their maps, filled with allegorical figures, gods, angels, or symbols of wisdom peering into the void. These decorations were not mere ornament. They served as acknowledgments of what the maps could not show, the vast unknown stretching beyond the fragile borders of ink. In some cases, star charts and terrestrial maps were fused together, suggesting that the Earth was only one layer in a greater cosmic design. To study a map was no longer to know the world fully, but to confront the terrifying realization that the world was far larger than anyone could grasp. One striking example comes from the celestial globes of Vincenzo Coronelli. His creations were not navigational tools in the strict sense, but theatrical monuments, grand spheres painted with constellations, planets, and mythical beasts. Standing before them, One was invited not to calculate, but to contemplate. They spoke to the imagination, to awe, to the thin line between knowledge and mystery. The silence in their vast, blank expanses reminded viewers that most of the cosmos remained uncharted and perhaps unchartable. Philosophers, too, seized upon the metaphor of the map. Immanuel Kant, reflecting on the limits of reason, compared human knowledge to a finite island surrounded by an ocean of the unknown. For him, the map became a symbol of epistemology itself. We live within borders we can chart, but beyond them lies a sea that resists all exploration. This was not simply poetic. It was a recognition that silence, what cannot be mapped, defines the very shape of human thought. And yet, this silence did not discourage exploration. On the contrary, it became fuel for imagination. Writers of the era began to imagine lands beyond lands, invisible continents, and hidden realms. Maps were used in novels and philosophical tales not to assert reality, but to question it. Jonathan Swift, in Gulliver's Travels, invented entire geographies, floating islands, societies of horses, using the authority of maps to blur the boundary between truth and satire. Here, cartography's silence became playful, even subversive, a way of mocking the pretense of complete knowledge. Still, the darker edge of silence remained. Colonial expansion continued, and with it, maps became instruments of erasure. Entire cultures and territories were silenced, their names replaced, their existence reduced to empty space awaiting European inscription. What Enlightenment celebrated as rational ordering was often, for others, an obliteration of their own maps, their own cosmologies. In this way, the silence of Enlightenment cartography was double-edged, a silence of humility before infinity and a silence of violence imposed upon others. The most haunting aspect of these maps, however, lies in their emotional resonance. To a viewer in the 18th century, standing before an atlas or globe, the sensation was not triumph, but tinged with fear. Here was the earth, vast yet still incomplete. Here was the sky, infinite and unfathomable. And between them, the fragile line of human comprehension, a thin band of ink standing against silence. The maps whispered not of mastery, but of mystery, drawing the viewer into the unsettling realization that they were adrift in an ocean without boundaries. Today, when we look back at these Enlightenment maps, their silences still speak. They remind us that the act of mapping is never neutral. It is always shaped by what we choose to show and what we choose to leave blank. They remind us that knowledge is finite, while mystery stretches endlessly beyond. And most of all, they invite us into the same confrontation that once shook philosophers and explorers alike. The confrontation with infinity, the realization that the maps we draw, no matter how precise, will always be surrounded by a silence we cannot erase. The 19th century marked an era when exploration reached its fever pitch. Steamships, improved navigation, and the relentless drive of empire pushed human presence deeper into the uncharted regions of the globe. Yet, paradoxically, the closer the world came to being fully mapped, the more its mysteries seemed to expand. The silence of the cartographers shifted once again, this time not as blank space, but as secrecy wrapped in precision. Maps began to project an air of completeness, as though nothing remained hidden. And yet, embedded in their grids and coordinates, subtle absences persisted, revealing that silence had simply taken on a more sophisticated form. Picture the great colonial surveys of Africa. Teams of explorers, soldiers, and surveyors marched through deserts and jungles, measuring distances with chains, recording altitudes with barometers, inscribing rivers and mountains with mathematical rigor. To the eye of the European public, these maps appeared authoritative, exact, final. Yet to the people whose lands they charted, they were distortions, abstractions that erased villages, languages, and sacred sites. The silence here was not ignorance, but omission, a deliberate act of power. Whole cultures were excised from a map, replaced by empty lines waiting for imperial names. The maps became weapons as much as tools, and their silence became the sound of domination. At the same time, the polar regions emerged as the last frontiers. The Arctic and Antarctic appeared on maps as vast expanses of whiteness, latticed with speculative coastlines, dotted with islands that sometimes shifted from chart to chart. The silence here was literal, blankness signifying absence, a canvas of uncertainty. Expeditions were launched into these voids, many ending in tragedy, swallowed by ice and storms. When explorers failed to return, their maps remained as haunting testaments to the limits of human ambition, silence preserved as geography. To gaze upon a 19th-century polar map was to feel both awe and dread, to confront the boundary between knowledge and the abyss. Yet even within supposedly settled regions, anomalies crept in. Scholars have long noted curious inconsistencies in certain 19th-century maps. Rivers that bend impossibly, coastlines that mimic celestial patterns, and landmarks that seem to echo the ratios of sacred geometry. Were these artifacts of human error or vestiges of something more intentional? Some argue that cartographers, especially those steeped in Freemasonry or esoteric traditions, encoded hidden knowledge in their work. Compass roses aligned with constellations, graticules mirrored cosmic proportions, and elaborate margins hinted at allegories that went far beyond navigation. Here, silence was not blankness, but symbol, a whisper left for those with eyes sharp enough to see. The scientific revolution of cartography in this era only deepened the paradox. With triangulation, astronomical measurements, and new surveying tools, maps gained unprecedented accuracy. Railways and telegraphs demanded precision, and the world shrank beneath grids of longitude and latitude. But with every increase in detail, the silences grew more subtle. What was left out was no longer oceans of unknowns, but pockets of secrecy, restricted territories, military bases, resource-rich lands concealed from rivals. The British Ordnance Survey, for example, mapped every inch of the Isles with obsessive accuracy, yet redacted or distorted areas deemed sensitive to national security. Silence now wore the mask of authority, concealed beneath the appearance of total knowledge. The 19th century also birthed a new mythology of lost continents. The idea of Atlantis resurfaced, not as pure legend, but as something cartographers cautiously alluded to. Maps of the Atlantic sometimes bore faint, suggestive markings, shallow banks, unexplained ridges, features that seemed to hint at submerged lands. Likewise, in the Indian Ocean, the speculative continent of Lemuria found its way into scientific discussions, invoked to explain the distribution of species. Though ultimately rejected, these phantom geographies occupied maps, straddling the line between science and myth. Here, silence took the form of uncertainty, speculation preserved in cautious ink. Perhaps most unsettling was the way maps of this era influenced imagination. The empty spaces of Africa and Asia on European maps were seen not as voids, but as invitations, places to project fantasies of wealth, conquest, or salvation. Explorers marched into these silences believing they would uncover gold, kingdoms, or even Eden itself. The maps did not simply record. They shaped destiny, transforming absence into allure. And when the lands were filled in, the silence shifted once again, absorbed into the lives and stories erased by imperial ink. As the century drew to a close, the world seemed nearly complete. Atlases boasted of total coverage, every coast measured, every mountain fixed. Yet beneath this apparent triumph lingered an unease. For all the lines and symbols, there remained the suspicion that the maps were still not telling the whole truth. What lay beneath the seas, beneath the ice, or beneath the silence of empire? The maps did not say. They could not. That silence is what still haunts us. It is the silence of erased cultures, of vanished explorers, of anomalies left unexplained. It is the silence of maps that appeared final yet carried within them deliberate absences, concealed knowledge, and unspoken truths. The 19th century may have filled in the blank spaces, but it did not dispel the mystery. Instead, it transmuted it, embedding silence deeper, hiding it behind grids and precision, waiting for future generations to notice that even the most complete map is still a veil, never the world itself. To study these maps now is to feel the weight of this silence pressing through the paper. It is to realize that the very act of mapping is inseparable from secrecy, omission, and power. The 19th century taught us that silence is not the absence of knowledge, but a force shaping knowledge itself, a force that continues to shape how we see the world today. The 20th century dawned with a sense of triumph. Humanity, for the first time in history, possessed maps that seemed nearly complete. Railroads stitched continents together, telegraph cables spanned oceans, and aerial photography promised a God's-eye view of the Earth. The globe appeared conquered, every wilderness accounted for, every coastline measured. And yet, just beneath this aura of certainty, silence crept back into the picture, this time darker, more carefully hidden, and far more deliberate than before. Governments realized that maps were no longer just instruments of navigation. They were instruments of power. As warfare became increasingly global, states understood that knowledge of terrain, borders, and resources could tip the balance between survival and defeat. Entire regions were censored, airfields erased, coastlines subtly shifted. Maps published for public consumption often contained deliberate distortions. Rivers that ended too soon, roads that did not exist, whole towns misplaced or removed altogether. To hold the real map was to hold an advantage over both enemies and citizens alike. Silence now was weaponized. This era produced one of the strangest phenomena in cartographic history: phantom settlements. On official maps, certain towns appeared, places with names, coordinates, sometimes even street layouts. Yet when travelers arrived, they found nothing but empty fields or forests. These paper towns were not accidents, but traps, invented by cartographers to catch plagiarists. If the fake settlement appeared on another company's map, it proved theft. But there was also something uncanny about these creations. Fake towns sometimes took on a life of their own, seeping into local lore, inspiring ghost stories, or even being physically built after the fact. Here, the silence of the map became paradoxical. It created presence from absence, a fictional geography haunting the real one. Meanwhile, in the shadow of war, entire landscapes vanished behind classification. The Second World War and the Cold War that followed turned maps into strategic secrets. In the Soviet Union, public atlases omitted military zones, misaligned city grids, and scrambled street names. Even Moscow's maps were distorted, designed to mislead outsiders. In the West, secrecy took subtler forms: restricted aerial images, blacked-out naval bases, redacted coastlines. The silences grew layered, technical, and invisible to the casual eye. Citizens walked through landscapes that were partially erased on paper, living inside carefully constructed absences. Beyond the surface of Earth, a new silence emerged: space. When satellites first sent back images of the planet, it seemed as though humanity had achieved ultimate vision, stripping away the last vestiges of the unknown. But what we gained in scope, we lost in certainty. Suddenly, questions multiplied. Were the unexplained anomalies captured in certain images? Blurred structures, geometric shadows, glowing streaks crossing the dark. Governments cropped, edited, and concealed, releasing only curated photographs. Some of the earliest satellite maps contained strange gaps, as though entire regions of the planet had been swallowed in censorship. Was it error, technical limitation, or deliberate omission? The silence persisted, even in orbit. Perhaps most eerie were the stories of missing islands. Throughout the 20th century, expeditions set out to chart the Pacific and Indian Oceans with scientific precision. And yet, time and again, ships arrived at coordinates listed in reputable atlases, only to find nothing but endless water. Sandy Island near Australia, Bermeja off Mexico, and dozens of others became ghostly absences. Some are blamed on human error, others on shifting sandbanks or volcanic disappearance. But the persistence of these phantom geographies suggested something stranger, that maps themselves carried a residue of myth, that silence could masquerade as presence until exposed. Technology only deepened the paradox. The rise of digital mapping in the late 20th century promised omniscience. Satellites could track highways, farms, even individual cars. Yet the more detail emerged, the more subtle the silences became. Sensitive installations appeared as blurred pixels. National borders shimmered with ambiguity, their lines contested or manipulated. Even in consumer products like Google Earth, entire swaths of land were blacked out, mosaics of censorship scattered across the globe. To zoom in too closely was to encounter silence, once again modernized and pixelated. But silence was not always imposed by governments. Corporations, too, learned the value of secrecy. Oil companies produced detailed geological maps of potential reserves, yet these rarely saw public release. Technology firms guarded satellite data, releasing only fragments. Maps became privatized, their silences determined by profit. For the first time in history, the Earth itself was hidden not only for reasons of war or empire, but for reasons of commerce. Amid these absences, however, the human imagination refused to rest. Myths adapted to the modern age. Conspiracies about hidden bases, underground cities, or censored islands proliferated, fueled by the very silences of the maps. If something was blurred, erased, or omitted, surely it must be hiding something extraordinary. Silence became a spark for speculation, a stage for both paranoia and wonder. By the late 20th century, the illusion of completeness had shattered. The map no longer promised certainty. Instead, it revealed itself as a contested artifact, part truth, part omission, part manipulation. For every brightly colored atlas sold in bookstores, there was a darker counterpart hidden in vaults and archives, filled with restricted zones and unmarked sites. The silence was no longer confined to the edges of the known world. It had seeped into the very heart of civilization, embedded in the spaces we thought we knew best. To look at a 20th century map is to feel the tension between presence and absence. It is to recognize that the silence is not accidental but intentional, a fabric woven into the very act of representation. The more powerful the maps became, the more carefully silence was preserved within them. And in this paradox lies their enduring fascination. The map of the 20th century does not simply show us the Earth. It shows us how much of the Earth remains hidden, reminding us that even in an age of satellites and digital omniscience, silence is the one element cartography can never erase. The 21st century has been heralded as the age of absolute vision, a time when anyone with a smartphone can summon the world in the palm of their hand. Satellite constellations blanket the Earth, drones hover above cities, and high-resolution maps update in real time. At first glance, it appears that the age-old silence of the maps has finally been defeated. Every street, every forest, every coastline is visible, searchable, traceable. Yet, as with every age before, the silence has not vanished. It has only transformed, finding new ways to conceal itself within the very technologies that claim transparency. Consider the digital giants whose platforms dominate the modern mapping landscape. Google Earth, Apple Maps, Baidu, Yandex, all promise access to every corner of the planet. But a closer look reveals distortions that are anything but random. Certain military bases are pixelated into oblivion, blurred patches interrupt pristine imagery, and strategic facilities appear either as vague smudges or not at all. Some areas shift strangely when zoomed in, as if the ground itself bends beneath invisible hands. The public is given the illusion of total knowledge, while the real maps, the uncensored ones, remain locked behind layers of classification and corporate control. The silence is now algorithmic, coded into the architecture of the digital world. But beyond censorship, new mysteries emerge. Users scrolling across Google Earth have stumbled upon uncanny anomalies. Geometric patterns etched into deserts, massive spirals in the sands of Kazakhstan, vast grids stretching across the plains of China. Are these military installations forgotten archaeological sites or experiments in mapping itself? No official explanation is ever given. The silence here is not absence, but enigma, tantalizing fragments presented without context. And in the vacuum of explanation, speculation thrives. Conspiracy forums erupt with theories, while scientists offer cautious hypotheses. The maps of the 21st century may be alive with detail, but they are equally alive with unanswered questions. Another layer of silence comes from the politics of borders. In the physical world, boundaries are contested, fragile, shifting. But in the digital cartographies of corporations, borders are drawn differently depending on who is looking. In India, the map shows Kashmir as fully Indian territory. In Pakistan, the same map shades it as disputed. In China, entire regions like Arunachal Pradesh vanish into silence, reclassified to suit national claims. Digital maps, far from being neutral, are now tailored propaganda engines, silently reshaping reality to match political narratives. The silence is not only what is hidden, but what is overwritten, disguised beneath the illusion of neutrality. And then there is the ocean, the last great abyss. Satellites skim the surface of the seas, but the depths remain largely unmapped. To this day, more than 80% of the seafloor is unknown, left as vast stretches of blue silence on even the most advanced maps. Occasionally, these silences ripple into public awareness. In 2011, a strange, pixelated rectangular outline appeared deep in the Pacific on Google Earth, sparking claims of Atlantis. It was later explained as an artifact of sonar mapping, but the image persisted, fueling modern myths. The ocean maps remind us that beneath the veneer of global coverage, our knowledge is still shallow, our silence still immense. Space, too, has become a new frontier of cartographic silence. Images from the Moon, Mars, and beyond are released with meticulous control. High-resolution data exists, but only fragments trickle out to the public. NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, and private companies release mosaics of stitched-together images, where certain patches are blurred or omitted altogether. In the absence of explanation, imaginations run wild. Claims of alien structures, artificial lights, or censored craters proliferate. Whether true or not, these silences reveal a truth deeper than any conspiracy. Even as humanity pushes outward, the map is still not whole. It never can be. Yet perhaps the most profound silence of 21st century maps is not geographical, but personal. Every day, billions of people leave behind digital trails, GPS pings, location histories, movements traced across cities. These private maps are stored by corporations and governments, forming invisible atlases of human behavior. They are not blank spaces, but hidden ones, guarded by firewalls and algorithms, inaccessible to the very people whose lives they depict. Your own map, where you walked, what you searched, where you lingered, exists, but you may never see it. The silence is intimate, carved not into oceans or deserts, but into your own life, hidden in databases you will never touch. The 21st century has inverted the cartographic paradox. For millennia, the problem was too much blankness, too many silences. Today, the problem is too much information, too many layers, with silences buried beneath an avalanche of data. The map no longer hides its absences in vast white spaces. Instead, it overwhelms us with detail until the silences are lost in the noise, invisible yet omnipresent. To study these digital maps is to feel both awe and unease. Awe at the miracle of planetary vision, oceans, mountains, and cities laid bare with a flick of the finger. Unease at the realization that what we see is curated, filtered, censored, and often manipulated. The silence has not been defeated. It has adapted, slipping into algorithms, politics, corporations, and the gaps between surveillance and secrecy. The maps of our age are dazzling, but behind the glow of pixels, the same question lingers. What are we not allowed to see? The forbidden maps of the 21st century are not locked in dusty archives. They're right in front of us, every time we open our phones or zoom in on the Earth. Their power lies not in what they show, but in what they refuse to reveal. And in that refusal, in that silence, they preserve the same haunting mystery that has shadowed cartography since its birth. The silence, once drawn as empty margins on parchment, now hides in plain sight, encrypted in code, waiting to be noticed. The silence of the maps has never belonged solely to governments or empires. It also belongs to those who seek to preserve, to conceal, or to protect. Hidden within the folds of our modern world are ancient maps, fragments of parchment, carvings on stone, charts inscribed on copper, that whisper of geographies both familiar and forbidden. These are not the maps we find in schools or on our screens. These are maps kept in monasteries, private collections, secret archives, and oral traditions, surviving on the edges of recorded history. And their silence is not accidental. It is intentional, cultivated, and fiercely guarded. One of the most enigmatic examples is the Piri Reis map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. When rediscovered centuries later, it astonished scholars. The maps seem to depict the coastlines of South America and Antarctica with striking accuracy, at a time when much of that terrain was supposedly unknown. Even more puzzling, the map sources were said to be older charts, themselves drawn from lost civilizations. To this day, debates rage. Was it evidence of advanced ancient seafaring, or simply coincidence and clever extrapolation? What is undeniable is the silence surrounding it. Fragments missing, explanations absent, entire traditions of knowledge hinted at but never revealed. Across the globe, similar whispers echo. In China, legends tell of sea charts preserved in imperial archives that mapped lands across the Pacific long before Columbus set sail. In the Pacific Islands, navigators encoded vast ocean routes into stick charts, wooden frames strung with shells and fibers that revealed currents, swells, and invisible forces of the sea. These were not maps meant for outsiders. They were knowledge guarded within communities, passed down only through ritual and initiation. Their silence was protective, ensuring that sacred knowledge would not be misused. Even within the Western tradition, there are hints of suppressed geographies. Medieval monks, while illuminating manuscripts, occasionally drew world maps that seemed allegorical but also strangely precise. Some included lands far to the west, across oceans, centuries before those regions appeared on mainstream charts. Were these visions symbolic, or records of real journeys erased from history? The silence around these documents deepens the mystery. Many are locked in archives, accessible only to select scholars, their interpretations carefully controlled. The Vatican, often at the center of whispers about secret archives, has long been rumored to hold ancient maps that could rewrite history. Stories abound of charts showing the full extent of the world before it was discovered, or documents detailing lost continents like Atlantis or Lemuria. While much of this remains speculative, what cannot be denied is that vast collections of ancient documents exist, unseen by the public. Whether they contain forbidden maps or not, their very inaccessibility fuels the imagination. Silence here is not simply absence, but exclusion, a reminder of how power controls knowledge. Yet forbidden maps are not confined to parchment and ink. They live also in oral traditions, stories, and star maps of indigenous peoples. The Navajo and Hopi tell of sacred landscapes mirrored in the sky, with constellations mapping onto terrestrial sites. Aboriginal Australians speak of songlines, cosmic routes sung into being, guiding travelers across deserts with astonishing precision. To outsiders, these may not resemble conventional maps, but they are deeply cartographic, encoding space, direction, and meaning. Their silence stems from the fact that they are not meant for public display. To strip them of their sacred context and display them as curiosities would be to erase their essence. Modern archaeologists have occasionally stumbled upon these silences. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across the desert, vast geoglyphs forming animals, spirals, and pathways visible only from above. While often interpreted as ritual art, some argue they are maps of celestial alignments or guides to underground water. Whatever their function, their scale and precision suggest a sophisticated cartographic intent. Yet the culture that made them left no written explanation. Silence has preserved their mystery for millennia. The idea of forbidden maps also intersects with esoteric traditions. Secret societies, from the Freemasons to the Rosicrucians, have long been rumored to possess symbolic maps, not of physical terrain, but of hidden knowledge, initiation, or even the cosmos itself. Geometries, ratios, and alignments were encoded into temples, cathedrals, and diagrams that acted as maps to spiritual realities. To outsiders, they appear as cryptic designs. To initiates, they are guides through invisible landscapes of power and transformation. This form of cartographic silence is perhaps the most impenetrable of all, for it points not to lost continents or censored regions, but to realities beyond the physical, realities only accessible through inner vision. What unites all of these is the recognition that some maps are not meant for everyone. They are forbidden not because they are false, but because they are sacred, dangerous, or destabilizing. To reveal them openly might threaten existing structures of power, upset cultural balances, or expose truths humanity is not ready to confront. Silence, in this sense, becomes a form of stewardship. It is not ignorance, but choice, a boundary drawn around knowledge that must be preserved rather than consumed. And yet, this very silence invites obsession. Scholars pore over fragments, searching for traces of hidden geographies. Conspiracy theorists weave elaborate narratives of lost continents, extraterrestrial visitations, or suppressed technologies. Travelers seek out remote temples, deserts, and archives in hopes of glimpsing what lies behind a veil. Forbidden maps, whether real or imagined, exert a gravitational pull. They remind us that for all our satellites and databases, there are still regions of knowledge, geographic, cultural, spiritual, that remain out of reach. The forbidden maps of ancient and hidden traditions serve as a mirror. They reveal that the human desire to know, to chart, to master, is matched by an equally powerful instinct to conceal, to protect, to silence. The blank spaces on a medieval parchment, the blurred pixels of a satellite image, the encrypted patterns of a sacred chant. These are not failures of cartography. They are choices, and they remind us that the world we see on the map is never the whole world. Behind every line and symbol, silence waits, guarding truths that may be too vast, too dangerous, or too sacred to reveal. In the modern era, as technology has reached dazzling heights, whispers persist of maps that should not exist, maps that suggest knowledge out of place, out of time. These are the so-called anomalous maps, documents that seem to record geographies long before they were discovered or depict lands and features that challenge everything we believe about history. Their stories lie at the intersection of archaeology, conspiracy, and myth, forming a tapestry of intrigue where silence is the most telling detail. These maps are rarely displayed in museums, often dismissed by academia, and yet they refuse to disappear from cultural memory. They carry the aura of the forbidden, as though by their very existence they expose cracks in the official narrative of human progress. Take, for instance, the Dulcet Portolan of 1339. At first glance, it is an ordinary medieval sea chart designed for sailors navigating the Mediterranean and Atlantic. But look closer, off the coast of Africa, near where no European should have ventured at that time, appear coastlines that eerily resemble parts of South America. Are these coincidences products of artistic license? Or are they echoes of older knowledge, drawn from sources long erased from history? The silence surrounding such anomalies fuels speculation. Historians tend to brush them aside, while alternative thinkers insist they represent evidence of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact. The map itself sits mute in archives, unable to defend or deny, leaving only silence to deepen the mystery. Another strange example emerges from the Vinland map, which appeared in the mid-20th century and quickly ignited fierce debate. Purportedly dating from the 15th century, it depicts parts of the North American coastline labeled as Vinland, echoing Norse sagas of Leif Erikson's voyages. If authentic, it would confirm that Europeans had mapped America long before Columbus. If a forgery, it is a remarkably skillful one, woven into a fabric of parchment and ink that resists easy dismissal. Scientific tests have swung between authenticity and fraud, leaving the matter unsettled. And perhaps that is the deeper point. The uncertainty itself, the inability to pin down truth, is its own kind of silence, one that gnaws at our confidence in historical certainty. Beyond Europe, the mystery deepens with maps like the Kangnido, a Korean world map created in 1402. It displays Africa in surprising detail, centuries before such accuracy should have been possible. How could Korean cartographers have such knowledge? Were they drawing from ancient travelers, trade networks, or lost archives from even older civilizations? Official explanations lean toward diffusion of Arab geography, but the precision suggests something more. The map stands as an enigma, its silence echoing across centuries, reminding us that the story of human knowledge may not be as linear as we like to believe. Then there are the maps that hint at lost lands, continents erased not by politics, but by catastrophe. Charts from the early modern period sometimes show phantom islands that later vanished. Friesland, Hy-Brasil, Antillia. To sailors of the time, these were not myths, but destinations recorded with coordinates and coastlines. When later expeditions failed to find them, the maps became embarrassing relics, quietly removed from atlases. Yet what if some of these islands had once existed, only to be swallowed by the sea, erased by volcanic eruption or tectonic shift? In this possibility, silence becomes geological, written not by human choice, but by the Earth itself. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of anomalous maps is their recurrence. Across centuries and cultures, they emerge, whispering of unknown lands, impossible accuracies, or suppressed knowledge. They are often dismissed as errors or frauds, but their persistence suggests something more, that fragments of forgotten knowledge leak through, leaving traces in ink and parchment. The mainstream narrative insists on orderly progress, discovery following discovery, each civilization advancing upon the last. But these maps hint at ruptures in that story, suggesting knowledge gained and lost, civilizations rising and falling, truths hidden and revealed in cycles. Modern researchers have taken these anomalies further, connecting them to myths of Atlantis, Lemuria, or even extraterrestrial contact. While such interpretations often stretch beyond evidence, they tap into a real tension, the recognition that history is filled with silences and that maps, those symbols of certainty, are not immune. Indeed, their very authority makes their silences more haunting. To encounter a coastline on an ancient chart that should not be there is to feel the ground of certainty shift beneath your feet, to sense that the story we have inherited is incomplete. Today, many of these maps remain locked in archives, accessible only to a select few. Their images circulate in fragments online, stripped of context, repurposed for theories both plausible and wild. The institutions that hold them rarely address their anomalies directly, preferring to let silence speak in their place. This silence is powerful. It protects the integrity of official history, while simultaneously feeding the fires of curiosity, speculation, and doubt. In the end, anomalous maps are less about geography than about the fragility of knowledge itself. They remind us that maps are not just tools of orientation, but artifacts of perception, shaped by what was known, imagined, or concealed. When their lines defy our expectations, they force us to confront the possibility that our own age, too, may be drawing maps filled with silences future generations will puzzle over. They linger, half revealed, half forbidden, hovering between evidence and myth. Their silence is not emptiness, but resonance, an echo of forgotten worlds, suppressed journeys, and perhaps even truths humanity is not yet prepared to face. To gaze upon them is to sense the forbidden, not in what they show, but in what they suggest, that the history of the world may be vaster, stranger, and more mysterious than our maps will ever admit. The most unsettling maps are not the ones that openly display anomalies or phantom geographies. They're the ones that exist only in whispers, hidden deep within restricted archives, classified vaults, and private collections. These are the forbidden maps of governments and secret institutions. Documents too sensitive, too destabilizing, or too revelatory to ever be placed in the public eye. Unlike the yellowed parchments of antiquity, these modern maps are guarded by locks, laws, and silence. They do not appear in atlases or online databases. They lie in drawers where access is tightly controlled, where even acknowledgement of their existence is a matter of speculation. Consider the Cold War, a time when maps were as valuable as nuclear codes. Both the United States and the Soviet Union created atlases of extraordinary precision, charting not just topographies but infrastructures, supply lines, and vulnerabilities. The Soviets in particular produced maps of Western cities that were sometimes more accurate than the maps available to those who lived there. Roads were marked with exact gradients, bridges with load capacities, even the depths of sewers carefully recorded. These were not maps for civilians, they were invasion guides. And when the Cold War thawed, fragments of these atlases surfaced, astonishing cartographers with their thoroughness. Yet the full collections remain buried in archives, their silence a reminder that the most complete maps are often the most hidden. Governments continue this practice today. Satellite imagery has given rise to maps of extraordinary resolution, able to capture the smallest details of terrain, the tiniest movements of vehicles, even the shifts of shadows across a field. Yet what the public receives is a diluted version. High-resolution images are classified, withheld for military use, parceled out only in fragments. The silence here is pixelated, manifesting as blurred bases, missing coastlines, or inexplicable distortions. What we are allowed to see is not what truly exists, but a softened vision, carefully curated. Rumors swirl around even darker collections. Some believe that national archives hold maps of underground structures, vast tunnel networks, hidden bunkers, entire subterranean facilities carved beneath mountains. These maps, if real, would reveal a world parallel to our own, a shadow geography beneath our feet. Others whisper of restricted oceanic charts, mapping not just trenches and ridges, but anomalies on the seafloor, structures, formations, or objects that defy explanation. Occasionally, a declassified document surfaces showing tantalizing glimpses, a blurred sonar scan, a redacted diagram, but never the whole picture. Silence closes around the gaps, feeding speculation. Then there are the alleged maps of off-world locations. Though often dismissed as fantasy, persistent claims suggest that certain agencies have mapped the Moon and Mars in far greater detail than the public has seen. High-resolution images supposedly reveal structures, patterns, or anomalies that are quietly omitted from official releases. NASA and other space agencies provide curated mosaics, but the raw data is often inaccessible. To skeptics, this is simply technical necessity. To believers, it is proof of censorship. Here again, silence operates as a shroud, both ordinary and extraordinary, hiding either nothing or everything. But perhaps the most profound silences belong to corporate entities. In an age when mapping has become a commercial empire, the most advanced cartographies are no longer held solely by governments. Private companies, particularly those in energy, technology, and defense guard maps of staggering detail. Geological surveys that could reveal untapped resources, predictive climate models mapping the future of coastlines, global navigation datasets tracking every ship and plane. These are all forms of forbidden maps, locked behind paywalls, proprietary algorithms, and non-disclosure agreements. Unlike the silences of ancient maps, these are silences enforced by profit, hidden not because they are mythic, but because they are lucrative. And yet, across all these layers, military, governmental, corporate, the effect is the same. The forbidden maps generate a kind of gravitational pull. Their very absence shapes our perception of the world, creating zones of mystery where certainty should exist. To imagine what lies within these silences is to brush against the edge of revelation. What lies beneath the ice of Antarctica, where multiple nations have restricted mapping access? What exists in the deepest ocean trenches, where sonar surveys are classified? What do the highest resolution satellite images reveal that we are never allowed to see? The answer may be nothing extraordinary, merely sensitive infrastructures, mundane military secrets, or corporate interests. Or it may be everything, evidence of histories, civilizations, or geographies that would shatter our worldview. The power of forbidden maps lies not just in their contents, but in their concealment. By being hidden, they acquire a mythic quality, becoming symbols of all that remains beyond our reach. To contemplate these maps is to recognize that silence is itself a form of control. A blank patch, a blurred image, a missing file. These are not accidents. They are decisions, choices made by those who hold power over knowledge. The map is not just a reflection of the world. It is a battlefield of visibility and secrecy, a space where revelation and silence struggle against one another. The forbidden maps remind us that for every chart we hold, there are others we will never see. For every landscape drawn in detail, there is another erased in shadow. And perhaps this is the most haunting truth of all. The world we navigate is only half the world that exists. The rest lies locked away, sealed in vaults and servers, preserved in silence so deep that even acknowledging it feels like crossing a forbidden boundary. The fascination with forbidden maps extends far beyond governments, corporations, and secret archives. It seeps into the human imagination, inspiring explorers, scholars, and storytellers to pursue what has been deliberately hidden. In many ways, the forbidden map is less about geography and more about psychology. The lure of the unknown, the thrill of the inaccessible, and the tension between curiosity and prohibition. To gaze upon a map you are not allowed to see is to feel a magnetic pull, a deep, almost visceral urge to uncover what lies behind the veil. It is an impulse that has shaped history, spurred discoveries, and fueled legends that endure to this day. In the early 20th century, for example, a series of mysterious charts emerged from European archives. These maps depicted vast regions of the Arctic and Antarctic in astonishing detail, sometimes predating the official expeditions credited with their discovery. Scholars speculated endlessly. Had unknown navigators crossed these icebound realms centuries earlier? Were the charts based on oral knowledge, secret voyages, or lost technologies? The maps themselves offered no answers, only precise coordinates and contours, their silence more compelling than any written record. Such anomalies became the seeds of exploration, driving adventurers to the poles in search of truths suggested but never confirmed. This psychological magnetism persists in modern cartography. The digital era, while seemingly eliminating geographic mysteries, has created new forbidden spaces. Certain regions of the world remain blurred on Google Earth, not due to technical limitations, but deliberate restriction. Military bases, intelligence facilities, and sensitive border zones are often pixelated or distorted, creating islands of absence amidst the sea of information. For some, this is frustrating. For others, it is intoxicating. The partial knowledge invites speculation, allowing imagination to flourish where official channels are silent. Each blurred square becomes a story, each missing detail a provocation to wonder. The allure of forbidden maps is also deeply tied to history's lost civilizations. Consider the perennial fascination with Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu, lands that appear on some maps, vanish on others, and persist in legend. While mainstream science dismisses these as myth, the recurrence of these names across centuries and cultures is tantalizing. Maps that hint at these lost worlds suggest the possibility of knowledge deliberately erased or forgotten. Even as the evidence is sparse, the imagination fills the void, transforming the absence into a presence more vivid than any verified geography. Here, silence becomes narrative, and a map's power lies in what it does not and cannot say. Explorers themselves have historically responded to forbidden maps with audacity. Many of the great journeys of the 19th and 20th centuries were motivated by precisely this tension, the desire to chart what others had concealed, to see what official maps omitted. From the expeditions into the deep Amazon, guided by vague reports of rivers and valleys, to the perilous ventures into the uncharted deserts of Central Asia, forbidden maps have served as both compass and catalyst. Each blank space, each redacted feature, beckoned travelers with the promise of discovery and the thrill of danger. Silence, in these cases, was a challenge, a provocation to be overcome. The cultural impact of forbidden maps extends into literature, film, and art as well. Stories of hidden continents, lost treasures, and secret passages have captivated audiences for centuries. Treasure maps in adventure novels, cryptic charts in science fiction, and even symbolic maps in philosophical texts all draw on the archetype of the forbidden map. These cultural artifacts illustrate a fundamental human truth. Knowledge is never neutral. When a map conceals as much as it reveals, it becomes a tool of tension, wonder, and narrative propulsion. Its silences are the spaces where imagination thrives, where fear and curiosity coexist in delicate balance. Interestingly, forbidden maps also reflect societal anxieties and aspirations. During periods of geopolitical tension, maps became tools of psychological influence. Showing one version of reality to the public while withholding another creates a sense of uncertainty and speculation. In this sense, the forbidden map is not just a record of geography, but a mirror of power dynamics. It embodies the tension between the known and the unknown, between authority and curiosity, between what can be controlled and what lies beyond reach. The very act of restricting information transforms ordinary maps into instruments of influence, embedding silence as a strategic force. Modern adventurers and researchers continue to be drawn to these silences. Expeditions to remote regions, deep-sea explorations, and satellite investigations are often sparked by hints and fragments, incomplete charts, and redacted images. Even in a world dominated by high-resolution imagery, the thrill of the unknown remains powerful. Forbidden maps, whether ancient parchments or digital datasets, provide a tantalizing promise that the world still holds secrets and that some knowledge exists just beyond our grasp. Perhaps the most profound lesson of forbidden maps is that they are as much about perception as reality. They challenge our assumptions, force us to question authority, and confront us with the limits of what we can know. Every missing coastline, every blurred structure, every lost continent embodies a tension between revelation and concealment. They remind us that the world is not simply a collection of coordinates, but a complex web of history, power, and mystery, one that we can chart only partially and never fully. Ultimately, forbidden maps serve as both warning and invitation. They caution that knowledge can be controlled, erased, or distorted, yet they also beckon explorers, scholars, and dreamers to peer into the silences and imagine what might lie hidden. To study these maps is to participate in a centuries-long dialogue between presence and absence, truth and omission, authority and curiosity. And in that dialogue, we discover perhaps the most compelling geography of all, the landscape of human wonder, drawn not in lines and symbols, but in the spaces that remain deliberately, tantalizingly forbidden. The 21st century has introduced a new dimension to forbidden maps, the intersection of technology, surveillance, and the delicate politics of information. With satellites orbiting the Earth in swarms, drones mapping inaccessible regions, and private companies amassing geospatial data on a scale previously unimaginable, humanity has never had such a detailed view of the planet. Yet, paradoxically, the more complete the map becomes, the more pronounced the silences grow. Blank spaces are now rare, but hidden zones, restricted airspaces, censored infrastructure, pixelated military installations remain, their absence amplified by the sheer density of information surrounding them. It is a silence that commands attention precisely because it is deliberate. Military secrecy remains a major driver of forbidden cartography. Across the globe, sensitive installations, nuclear facilities, intelligence headquarters, drone bases, and research complexes are deliberately obscured in publicly available maps. Even when their locations are known, details of their layout, dimensions, or surrounding infrastructure are redacted or distorted. This is not simply about concealment. It is about shaping perception. By controlling what is seen and what is hidden, governments assert power over both domestic populations and potential adversaries. Each blurred rectangle, each missing label, is a silent assertion of authority, a message that some territories belong to secrecy rather than the public domain. Digital censorship has layered new complexity onto this landscape. Companies that provide mapping platforms must navigate a maze of national regulations, military sensitivities, and corporate interests. Areas that might be fully visible in one country are pixelated in another. Borders shift subtly, coastlines are altered, and even some natural landmarks are partially hidden. In the case of disputed territories, the same satellite image may be presented differently depending on the user's location. The forbidden map is no longer simply physical. It is algorithmic, curated, and mutable. Its silence is shaped as much by law and politics as by geography. The oceans, long the last frontier of human exploration, continue to host hidden geographies. While satellite imagery and sonar mapping have revealed more of the seafloor than ever before, vast tracts remain unexplored or unpublished. Classified naval charts may depict undersea cables, strategic choke points, or topographic features never revealed to the public. Even as commercial maps detail shipping lanes and bathymetry, the true depths hold secrets. Submerged mountains, trenches, and mysterious formations remain shrouded in silence, sometimes deliberately omitted from civilian maps, sometimes preserved only in technical datasets inaccessible to non-specialists. Space adds yet another layer of forbidden mapping. Lunar and Martian terrains are increasingly charted, yet the highest resolution datasets are often restricted to government agencies and private contractors. Images released to the public are mosaics, stitched from multiple sources, often with areas blurred or obscured. Conspiracy theories flourish in these silences, from claims of hidden lunar bases to anomalous Martian formations. Whether grounded in reality or speculation, these digital gaps echo centuries of forbidden cartography, demonstrating that the urge to conceal has simply moved beyond Earth. Yet the most profound silences may be internal, embedded within the data we generate ourselves. Modern mapping platforms collect staggering quantities of personal geospatial information, movements, locations, travel patterns, and behavioral trends. These digital footprints form invisible maps of society, private yet meticulously preserved by corporations and governments. Though highly detailed, they are inaccessible to the individuals who produce them, hidden behind layers of security, algorithmic processing, and legal restrictions. In a sense, these are forbidden maps of human behavior, blank in the eyes of their creators, but exhaustively recorded in the hands of others. This contemporary form of forbidden cartography also intersects with environmental knowledge. Climate change, rising sea levels, and shifting coastlines are mapped in sophisticated models, Yet access to detailed predictive data is often restricted to researchers and policymakers. Detailed hazard maps of vulnerable regions, high-resolution flood projections, and predictive maps of ecosystem collapse are frequently controlled, edited, or withheld, creating zones of silence where the public remains unaware of potential risks. The forbidden map thus becomes not only a tool of power, but of precaution, shaping perception through absence as much as through revelation. Artists, storytellers, and theorists have responded to these modern silences by creating conceptual maps that highlight what is hidden. Digital artists overlay censored areas, blurred military zones, and missing data onto visualizations of the planet, transforming absence into narrative. Filmmakers and writers explore the tension between hypervisibility and deliberate erasure, dramatizing the way forbidden maps reflect societal, political, and technological anxieties. In this sense, silence itself becomes a medium, shaping the way we think about space, knowledge, and authority. Despite the unprecedented detail available today, forbidden maps remind us that the world is never fully knowable. Every blurred square, censored zone, and omitted feature is a testament to human control, discretion, and secrecy. Even as satellites illuminate the planet in high resolution, the unseen persists, signaling that some knowledge must remain hidden, whether for reasons of security, commerce, or ethical constraint. The allure of the forbidden map endures precisely because it combines what we can see with what we cannot, merging revelation and mystery into a single, compelling landscape. To study these maps is to confront the tension between omniscience and ignorance, between visibility and concealment. The 21st century has not eliminated the silences that have haunted cartography for centuries. It has intensified them, embedding them within the very fabric of our digital, satellite-driven perception. Forbidden maps, once carefully inked on parchment or etched into stone, now exist in pixels, code, and data layers, yet they carry the same power: to intrigue, to provoke, and to remind us that no matter how detailed our vision becomes, some spaces are destined to remain unseen. The forbidden maps of the modern era are more than static artifacts. They are living testaments to humanity's desire to control, conceal, and interpret the world. Across history, maps have been tools of discovery and instruments of authority, shaping not only how we navigate the physical world, but also how we perceive knowledge itself. The 20th and 21st centuries, with their leaps in technology, warfare, and surveillance, have elevated cartography to a level of unprecedented complexity, transforming maps into instruments of both revelation and deliberate omission. They are simultaneously mirrors of our understanding and masks for what remains hidden, and nowhere is this tension more vivid than in the maps that are intentionally forbidden. To understand the power of these maps, we must first consider their origins. In earlier centuries, cartographers were bound by the limits of observation and imagination. Ocean charts were drawn from sailors' accounts, explorers' sketches, and celestial navigation. The world beyond sight remained blank, white spaces calling out with both possibility and danger. These spaces were often filled with dragons, sea monsters, or phantom islands, symbols of fear, warning, and imagination. The silence of the unknown was not neutral. It carried moral and practical weight, instructing travelers on the limits of safety and knowledge. But as human vision expanded, through both exploration and technology, the blank spaces became contested and the silences more intentional. In a modern context, the stakes of cartographic silence are higher than ever. Governments maintain maps that are classified at levels of extreme secrecy. Some charts depict detailed layouts of critical infrastructure: bridges, tunnels, military compounds, energy grids, and even underground facilities invisible to ordinary observation. These maps are not created for public use. They exist for strategy, defense, and control. In the United States, for example, the military has produced maps so precise that every street lamp, hydrant, and utility line in certain cities is cataloged. In Russia, Similar projects have created exhaustive depictions of both domestic and foreign terrain. The level of detail is astonishing, but it comes with enforced silence, restricted access, legal penalties for disclosure, and selective release that leaves the public seeing only what authorities permit. Digital technology has amplified this tension. High-resolution satellites, drones, and geospatial software now allow for mapping at scales unimaginable a century ago. Yet, paradoxically, the more powerful these tools become, the more the silences are amplified. Entire military bases remain blurred on Google Earth, despite the capacity to image them in full detail. Nuclear facilities, research installations, and border zones are often obscured in digital maps, sometimes with visible distortions or deliberate misalignments. The forbidden map has not disappeared in the age of global observation. It has migrated into code, pixels, and curated imagery, where access is carefully controlled and knowledge is partitioned according to power. The oceans remain another major frontier of forbidden cartography. While bathymetric surveys and sonar mapping have illuminated much of the seafloor, huge portions remain unmapped or classified. Some charts, produced by naval institutions, contain topographic and geological details unavailable to the public, including deep-sea trenches, submarine ridges, and oceanic anomalies. In addition, maps of undersea cables and strategic choke points are highly guarded, as they represent both national security and global infrastructure. Here, the forbidden map intersects with technology and geopolitics, showing that the act of mapping is inseparable from the power to conceal and control. Ancient maps, too, continue to captivate, especially those that suggest lost knowledge or civilizations. Documents like the Pyre Reis map, the Vinland map, and the Cognito are remarkable not only for their accuracy, but for the silences they enshrine. They hint at voyages unrecorded, lands unexplored, or knowledge suppressed by the historical record. The mystery of these maps lies in what they do not say. Missing annotations, unexplained coastlines, or references to sources that no longer exist. Scholars have debated their authenticity for decades, yet the gaps, the silences, remain, transforming these maps from mere navigational tools into portals of speculation, wonder, and controversy. Phantom islands and lost continents populate both historical and modern maps, further deepening the intrigue. Throughout history, cartographers have depicted islands that never existed. Friesland, Hy-Brasil, Antillia, and Sandy Island are just a few examples. Some are deliberate traps, paper towns in the sea meant to catch map thieves. Others may have been based on misread reports, optical illusions, or miscalculations. Yet their repeated presence across centuries suggests a more profound human fascination with the unknown and need to chart the unseen. These phantom geographies remind us that the forbidden map does not merely conceal reality. It creates a space where imagination, myth, and possibility converge. The 21st century has brought forbidden maps into the personal sphere as well. Digital platforms now collect staggering amounts of geospatial data, location histories, travel patterns, movement traces, and behavioral maps that together create a record of individual lives on a planetary scale. Though precise and exhaustive, these maps are largely inaccessible to the public, stored in private databases managed by corporations and governments. Here, silence is intimate. It is your own life mapped in detail, yet hidden, invisible, and controlled by others. The forbidden map has become personal, extending the tension between visibility and secrecy into everyday existence. Environmental knowledge adds another layer of contemporary silences. Climate change, rising sea levels, and shifting ecosystems are all subjects of sophisticated geospatial modeling. Detailed predictive maps of flood zones, wildfire risks, and glacier retreat exist, but access is often restricted to policymakers and researchers. The public encounters only generalized, curated versions of these maps, leaving critical knowledge obscured. In effect, forbidden maps operate in the realm of risk. By withholding certain data, societies control perception, manage panic, and assert authority over how knowledge is disseminated. Silence becomes both protection and manipulation. Cultural, artistic, and literary responses to forbidden maps highlight their enduring psychological power. Writers, filmmakers, and artists have long drawn inspiration from maps that conceal as much as they reveal. From adventure novels to speculative fiction, the forbidden map functions as a narrative device, creating tension, mystery, and wonder. The blurred military base, the missing island, or the redacted coastline becomes a stage for exploration, both literal and imaginative. These silences invite engagement, forcing observers to confront the limits of what can be known and to imagine the uncharted. Ultimately, forbidden maps are a testament to humanity's enduring fascination with control and mystery. They remind us that knowledge is never neutral. It is shaped by power, ethics, and circumstance. Every blurred pixel, missing annotation, or secret archive represents a choice. What to show, what to conceal, and what to leave for future discovery. In this way, the forbidden map is both a reflection of the world as it is and a statement about the limits of human understanding. To study forbidden maps is to navigate a landscape of tension between revelation and concealment, certainty and doubt, knowledge and speculation. They challenge assumptions, inspire exploration, and provoke reflection on what is intentionally hidden versus what simply remains undiscovered. Across centuries, from parchment and ink to pixels and satellites, the forbidden map endures as a symbol of the human desire to chart, control, and imagine the unknown. Even in an age of near-total visibility, their silences persist, reminding us that some truths remain beyond reach, some lands unseen, and some stories untold. The forbidden maps of the cosmos are not merely historical curiosities or classified documents. They are a mirror reflecting humanity's eternal tension between knowledge and mystery. From the earliest etched parchments to the most advanced satellite imagery, maps have served as instruments of power, curiosity, and imagination. They guide explorers, inform armies, shape nations, and, most profoundly, provoke questions about the limits of perception itself. Yet for every line drawn, every coastline traced, and every contour plotted, there exists a counterforce, the silence of what is deliberately hidden, lost, or unknown. In this tension between revelation and concealment, the forbidden map assumes its greatest potency, both as a tool and as a symbol. Even as we live in an age of unprecedented technological capability, where satellites orbit Earth in swarms and global positioning systems track movements to the meter, the forbidden map endures. Modern censored areas are not anomalies. They are reminders that knowledge is inseparable from authority. Military bases, strategic installations, and sensitive infrastructure remain obscured, pixelated, or redacted in public maps, even when their approximate locations are known. The omissions are deliberate, creating zones of silence amidst an otherwise transparent digital landscape. These absences are not merely gaps. They're statements, asserting control over who can see, who can know, and who can act. The oceans exemplify this paradox. Vast tracts of a seafloor remain unmapped or classified, their details known only to specialized institutions. Submarine cables, undersea bunkers, trenches, and ridges are often withheld from public maps, their presence invisible despite their global significance. The ocean's depths, once a realm of myth, now exist as partially charted, partially forbidden spaces. Even with modern sonar and satellite technology, secrets remain submerged, waiting for those bold or curious enough to seek them. Here, the forbidden map becomes both literal and metaphorical. It charts absence as much as presence, concealing information while stimulating wonder and speculation. Beyond the Earth, the frontier of forbidden cartography extends to space. The Moon, Mars, and other celestial bodies are mapped with increasing resolution. Yet the most detailed datasets are frequently restricted to government agencies and private contractors. Public releases are curated mosaics, occasionally blurring or omitting areas for reasons ranging from national security to unexplained anomalies. The result is a new layer of forbidden geography, the cosmos itself, a landscape that is partially visible, partially hidden, and fully tantalizing. Conspiracy theories thrive in these silences, reflecting humanity's deep need to fill gaps in perception with narrative, speculation, and imagination. Ancient maps continue to intrigue precisely because of the silences they enshrine. The Piri Reis map, the Vinland map, and the Cognito chart reveal not only the skill of their creators, but also the profound gaps in the historical record. They suggest voyages unrecorded, lands unseen, and knowledge deliberately suppressed. Missing annotations, unexplained coastlines, and references to lost sources transform these artifacts from navigational tools into enduring mysteries. Their authority is amplified by absence. What they do not reveal is as compelling as what they do. The allure of lost continents, phantom islands, and anomalous lands illustrates how forbidden maps stimulate both imagination and inquiry. From Atlantis to Lemuria, from High Brazil to Sandy Island, these geographies exist as much in legend as in cartography. Some were deliberately invented, paper islands used to trap copyists or claim discoveries. Others may have been misinterpreted observations. Yet their repeated presence across maps and centuries suggests something more profound, a human drive to chart what lies beyond comprehension, to give form to the unknown, and to acknowledge the presence of spaces that cannot, or should not, be fully grasped. In the digital era, the forbidden map has become intensely personal. The aggregation of GPS data, travel histories, and geospatial behavior forms detailed maps of human life, often inaccessible to the individuals whose movements are charted. These maps are invisible yet exhaustive, silently documenting patterns and behaviors that remain hidden from view. Here, the forbidden map is not only geographic but intimate, a reflection of modern surveillance and control that transforms private experience into forbidden knowledge for others. Environmental maps also demonstrate the modern dynamics of concealment and revelation. High-resolution models predicting climate change, rising sea levels, wildfire risks, and ecological collapse exist, but public access is often limited. Detailed hazard projections are curated, simplified, or withheld, creating silences where knowledge could provoke action or alarm. In these cases, the forbidden map functions as both a tool of control and protection, dictating not just what we know, but how and when we know it. Absence becomes a form of authority, shaping perception as much as presence does. The psychological power of forbidden maps lies in their tension between attraction and repulsion, between curiosity and prohibition. Humans are drawn to what they cannot access, compelled by the mystery encoded in absence. Blurred military bases, redacted coastlines, lost continents, and secret archives all act as magnetic points, pulling the imagination into territories where knowledge and speculation intermingle. Artists, writers, and filmmakers have long exploited this tension, using maps that conceal as narrative devices, creating landscapes where the unseen is as compelling as the visible. Ultimately, the forbidden map reminds us of the limits of knowledge and the permanence of mystery. Even in a world dominated by data, satellites, and instant communication, there remain spaces, both literal and metaphorical, that are deliberately obscured or inaccessible. These maps, whether ancient parchments, digital redactions, or restricted datasets, confront us with a profound truth. For every line drawn and every landscape charted, there exists a silence that cannot be erased. In studying forbidden maps, we confront not only the unknown territories of the world, but also the boundaries of human perception. These maps challenge assumptions, provoke wonder, and ignite exploration, revealing that the act of mapping is inseparable from the act of concealing. They are instruments of power, imagination, and reflection, reminding us that the world we see is only a fraction of a world that exists. Behind every chart, every coordinate, and every shaded region, silence endures, an invitation and a warning, a mystery and a guide. The forbidden maps of the cosmos are ultimately a testament to humanity's eternal quest, to know, to explore, and to imagine, even in the face of limits imposed by secrecy, circumstance, and a vast, uncharted unknown.